My cheating wife left with her lover. He beat her and left her crippled. If this story resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and share in the comments which city you're watching from. We'd love to know where our community is growing. I've been immensely disrespected by my wife and her lover, and honestly, I'm not ready to be the more mature person in this case. I don't really see the point of being morally good because I did that in the relationship at the end of the day. I still got cheated on. Now I understand why some guys turn into demons when they get hurt. It just doesn't feel like there's a true reward for being the good guy in the relationship. I'm a 30-year-old man, and I've been married to her for 3 years. I thought they were a good 3 years, but I'm starting to think she might have a completely different idea of things. One of those cases where the woman wants a bad boy. I don't understand why that's something that attracts women over the age of 25. It's such a silly thing to look for. Someone who misbehaves and is bound to be a problem is exactly who a person in this situation would be attracted to. Anyway, I noticed she started acting differently. It was subtle, but it didn't escape my attention. I loved this woman immensely, so I knew everything about her. I knew the things I needed to look out for to know if she was okay or if she wasn't. This time I realized something was wrong, but it wasn't like it usually was. She kept acting normal for the most part. It's not that she was acting like she was upset. She was just acting very different, like there was something on her mind she wasn't telling me. I try to be a good husband, so I didn't hesitate to try and find out what was going on with her. I asked her to talk to me, but she claimed there was nothing wrong with her. I didn't believe that, obviously, but she adamantly refused to budge on that front. She maintained that she was fine and that she didn't know what signs I was seeing. No matter how many times I asked, she just kept sticking to that. So I didn't bother pressing after a certain point. I hoped that if what she said was accurate, after a while she'd go back to normal and there'd be nothing for me to complain about. However, that wasn't what happened. I kept noticing those signs for a long time and brought it up once or twice more. She denied anything was wrong, but it seemed like after those 2 times I asked, she overcompensated and tried to act normal again. That's when I got truly suspicious. That's when I knew she wasn't being herself. From that point on, I started seriously taking note of the signs. I needed to know exactly what it was I saw in her that didn't fit so I could try to discover what was causing that behavior. What I found was that she was spending more time than usual in the bathroom, and when she came out, she'd interact with me too intensely. I noticed she had more excuses to leave the room when we did certain things together. I realized she no longer wanted to commit to weekend activities like before. She'd come home a little later than usual after work. She also stopped wanting to be as intimate as always. It kept happening, but nowhere near as much as I was used to. So many things changed at once, but she wanted me to believe she didn't notice or that there was nothing behind that change. I felt like she was taking me for a fool, expecting me to just believe her when it was so obvious things weren't right. I finally realized the only thing I could do was find out the truth on my own. I wasn't going to check her phone because she had it on her practically all day. Instead, I was going to check her laptop as it was connected to all the same services as her phone. I love technology. I waited until I had a clear opportunity, and when I knew I'd have hours to go through her emails, messages, and photos, I took the computer. I went to her messages first because I knew I'd find any explanation I was looking for there. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about infidelity at that point. I certainly was, because there was no chance she was planning some kind of massive surprise for me. That was the only other reason I would have expected to explain her odd behavior. I went through many of her messages and found quite a few things that worried me as a husband, like silly gossip that included talking about her personal affairs, which I felt crossed a line. I would have found a way to bring it up if it was the only thing I found, but it became clear I had bigger things to worry about much later. I went through her messages and genuinely found nothing that could truly explain how she was acting. That's when I decided to move on to the next step, checking her emails, and that's where I found what I was looking for. She'd been clever enough in her cheating not to text her lover. I mean, who texts back and forth with someone they know personally through email? It was smart, especially when you're being unfaithful and don't want what you're blathering about to be easily found. It caught my eye because the email subject didn't look professional or like a newsletter. I saw it was just 2 people talking back and forth, and the moment I could tell it was inappropriate, I scrolled down the thread to the first message. I wanted to see exactly how things had started between them. Here's the rundown. The two had met somewhere in the real world. The guy, a certain Duet, had told her he liked her, and she apparently gave him her email instead of her number or social media account. He said that struck him as peculiar, but that he liked her enough to play along. I think she did it because it's harder to detect an affair that's camouflaged in emails. It also ensured he couldn't see the life of a married woman, which was obvious on all her social media. However, I was wrong about the last part, or was I? I was right, but eventually she decided to tell him on her own. I don't know why she did it. I guess she didn't want the affair to get too serious. So she had to let the guy know there wouldn't be any chance of things turning into a formal relationship. He was disappointed, but commented that he was fine with it, as the sex was very good. He wasn't vague. Reading everything, it became very clear that these two people had been intimate very early in the email thread, and that this had continued regularly ever since. The first email was sent 10 months ago, but it was around that point when she admitted to him she was married, and I think her behavior towards me started to change back then. If you ask me to guess what it's all about, it's that she was fine cheating on me, but started to develop feelings. She told him she was married because she was looking for some kind of way out of the dilemma she was in. If you ask her, she'll probably say she loves us both. If she loves him, she can keep him. I know I'm not going to fight for a cheating woman for any reason in the universe. His response to her being married was that it was fine and that they could keep things going as they were, especially if they hadn't been caught yet. He asked for more information about me, and she gave him everything. She basically told the guy my life story, and he tested the waters being a little disrespectful about something personal I'd gone through, and she didn't defend me. Eventually, he felt comfortable enough to say I was too stupid to find out about them. And at that, she just laughed. I don't know. There's something that's so hard to accept when you see someone you genuinely thought you loved behaving in such a heartbreaking way. I would have sworn she'd never be the kind of person to cheat on me. But not only has she done it, she's been doing it consistently for 10 months. How am I supposed to feel about that? At no point does she feel remorse or decide to cut things off. I feel so much pain and try to deal with it like a man, but everyone knows what love is like. It weakens us. Sometimes that's good, but in cases like this it's very bad because it makes me feel like a coward for all the hurt I feel. I made sure to forward the entire email thread to myself. I'm making sure I have all the evidence on hand for when I'll need it most. Update 1. I had no choice but to confront my wife when my emotions started to overflow. I talked to a divorce lawyer, but hadn't paid to hire her yet. Now I have, so that's good. But at that moment, I tried to be patient and keep my emotions in check, though it just didn't work. I was watching her as she sat on the couch smiling, looking at something on her phone. Honestly, I hated seeing her happy. It set me off because I hadn't been able to truly feel happy since I discovered her affair. So I just blew up. I asked her what was so funny, and by my tone she understood I wasn't kidding. She looked surprised and explained she was just watching videos on her phone. I asked her if she thought she was a good person, and she nodded slowly. She said she wasn't perfect, but she felt she was generally a good person. I looked at her very closely after she said that, and shook my head. She asked me what was wrong and why I was acting so aggressively. I told her she wasn't a good person. I let her know I knew she'd been cheating on me. I knew about Duet, and I knew how long things had been going on. She seemed to go into shock the moment I said the word cheating, and was even more surprised when I mentioned his name. She knew there'd be no way to sneak around. She was guilty. She knew I wasn't bluffing and that I knew everything. That's why she didn't take the I don't know what you're talking about route. She couldn't. I asked her what she had to say, but she was struggling to find the words. That didn't surprise me. I'd cornered her, and it was going to be very difficult for her to find a way out. However, I wasn't going to make it easy for her, so I just waited for her to say something. She finally found her defense. I'm so sorry, honey. I know how this looks, and it looks bad. And I'm not going to say I didn't betray our marriage, but you just have to let me explain what was going on. She tried to sound reasonable, acknowledging her fault and acting like she was ready for a civilized dialogue. But there's genuinely no way to defend 10 months of cheating. And I told her so point blank. He wasn't a superior at work who was threatening her livelihood. He wasn't someone who held her cousin hostage. He had no power over her, so there was nothing she could point to that would make her look like a better person in this scenario. However, I told her to humor me. I wanted to hear what her explanation for everything was. It was clear she hadn't had much time to really think about what she was going to say. She told me she'd been feeling emotionally down. She said it had nothing to do with me, that it was her own thing, and that instead of trying to process it maturely, she took the wrong path to fix the problem and make herself feel better. She said she didn't mean to hurt me, something I couldn't help but scoff at. She wanted to keep talking, but I cut her off. I told her she knew she was lying, and so did I. So there was no point in us wasting time. I let her know I'd already spoken to a divorce lawyer and that we were getting divorced for sure. She started crying, but I ignored her. I said what I had to say, telling her it'd be best if she was the one to pack and leave the apartment, and that I was giving her until that weekend to do so. She kept crying, so I just gave up and left. I made sure my wife was served with the divorce papers at that point. She eventually left the house, which was great. It's been quiet without her, and a part of me misses everything we built, but I think that's normal. I'm not going to dwell on it. Eventually, I'll forget she was ever a part of my life, and I can't wait for that moment to come. But before that, I'll have to finish with the divorce, so I'll focus on that for now. Update 2. Having been married for such a short time, I never thought there'd be any kind of joy in being a divorced man. I don't feel pure happiness, but there's a lot of relief. I'm glad the drama's over because I hate drama, but I was forced into it. That's how things are sometimes. The divorce was simple. It wasn't complicated at all due to the length of our marriage and the fact that we don't have kids. No alimony was considered for her, not only because we earn almost the same, but because we haven't been married that long. There's no need for me to support her. I stayed in the apartment because she'd moved out, so it was easier that way. Apparently, she told her parents a half story about what happened because her mom and dad showed up and her father started making a big scene. He was talking about how people make mistakes and that I should have forgiven her. I tried to understand what they'd been told, but they didn't give me details. When I mentioned they wanted me to forgive someone who'd been cheating on me for 10 months, they suddenly had a lot less to say, which I found quite amusing. They left shortly after that, looking like fools. I don't know why, but I decided to unleash all my frustration on Duet. I felt like my ex-wife's life was already going to be miserable no matter what. She cried more times than I can count during the divorce, and I ended up exposing her to her parents. Although it wasn't my intention from the beginning, she forced me to do it. It backfired on her, and I'm glad. I sent the email thread to her parents to ensure the blow. They didn't say anything, but I know they read it, and I want them to see the daughter they raised. But back to Duet. This might be very surprising, but I discovered the guy's married, so I made the decision to ruin that. Two married people cheating on each other. And the most absurd thing is that my ex-wife didn't seem to know. He'd taken her for a fool. I sent her a text he didn't reply to let her know. I found out everything about Duet's life through a private investigator, and using all that information, I contacted his wife and told her exactly what her husband had been doing. There were no pleasantries. I simply sent her the email evidence and told her what he was up to. I let her know I'd gotten divorced because of it and that she could do the same. At first, she was very antagonistic, but she came back a few days later to apologize, telling me she'd realized I was telling the truth. I didn't talk much more with her because I didn't care enough. I was just there to mess things up. I went to his boss. I found out where he worked, which was a local business. I knew it probably wouldn't cost him his job, but I added it to the mix just to spite him. It seemed fun. My goal was for his boss to know he had a dishonest person among his employees. He can do with that information what he wants. Also, based on the emails he and my ex shared, it was clear he was a religious guy. He liked going to church. I found that funny, because how can you act so shamelessly and claim you're a Christian at the end of the day? I decided I'd also let the pastor know what kind of person he was. One day, I walked into his church, asked to speak with the pastor when I could, and told the elderly man that one of the people in his congregation wasn't a good person. By that time, I already had photos of Duet, and I showed them to the pastor, who just shook his head. He told me he'd always had a good impression of Duet, but that this changed things. He apologized to me and prayed for me, which I politely accepted. I don't know what Duet's life will be like now, but I want people to know what kind of person he is wherever he goes. I felt so disrespected by him that I had to make sure to get my revenge. As for my ex, I don't have energy to waste on her. I've done what I could, but she seems insignificant to me now. For the most part, I don't want it to seem like I'm still bothering about her. She doesn't even have anything to lose. She's that pathetic. Maybe someday I'll marry again, but for now I'm fine. I've dealt with enough at the hands of one woman, and I don't feel like getting into all that nonsense again. Final update. I thought that after the divorce and exposing Duet, the story would simply fade away, but karma has a very twisted way of coming full circle. The two cheaters, finding themselves abandoned by their partners and exposed to their social circles, decided to move in together. I guess they thought their forbidden love would survive reality, but it turned out to be quite the opposite. Living under the same roof became hell for them. They started fighting constantly. As I later learned, Duet would complain to my ex-wife every day that it was her fault his wife had left him and he'd lost his reputation at church. The toxicity escalated until one day, in the middle of an argument, he yelled in her face that she wasn't special, that she was just one more, and that he still had other lovers. The fights went from screaming to hitting. He started physically abusing her regularly. The situation reached a breaking point when my ex's father, who still held out hope of seeing how his daughter was doing, went to visit her unannounced. What he found was a nightmare. His daughter was lying on the floor, beaten and crying inconsolately. The man went wild with rage. He confronted Duet right there and gave him such a brutal beating that neighbors had to call the police. At that very moment, the father reported him and Duet ended up in jail, where he remains until now awaiting trial. My ex returned to her parents' home. She was bedridden because the last beating had been devastating. She couldn't even get up. A few days later, I received a call from my father-in-law. I expected an apology, but what I got was an absurd complaint. In a broken voice, he screamed at me that everything that was happening was my fault. He said that if I'd been mature and forgiven her, none of this would have happened and she'd be safe in our home. I couldn't help it. I let out a laugh full of contempt and hung up the phone without saying a word. However, the tragedy didn't end there. Sometime later, I learned from mutual acquaintances a shocking piece of news. Due to the severity of the spinal injuries Duet caused her during his last attack, my ex lost mobility in her legs. She's now confined to a wheelchair for life. Shortly after learning the definitive diagnosis, her father sought me out one last time. He intercepted me outside my apartment, completely out of his mind, trying to hit me and confront me as if I were responsible for his daughter's choices and her lover's violence. I defended myself, pushed him away forcefully, and when he tried to lunge again, I had to hit him to stop him. I looked him in the eyes while he was on the ground and told him coldly, "Stop bothering me once and for all. I didn't destroy her life. She did it herself." That was the end. I don't want any more problems, no calls, no dramas from a life that no longer belongs to me. I decided to sell everything, quit my job, and move to another city to start from scratch, in a place where no one knows who I am or knows this story.